Hey, you guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. What I'm going to be talking about today is the last full moon of 2024. We've got coming up here on Sunday, December 15th. This full moon peaks at 1:01 a.m. Pacific time, and this takes place in the sign of Gemini, 23 degrees Gemini. So what I'm going to do in this recording is I'm going to break down the sign of Gemini for you in pretty good detail because really this is the peak of a growth cycle that began approximately 6 months ago when we had the new moon in the sign of Gemini. Over these 6 months, we've all been experiencing this opportunity for growth that's related to the sign of Gemini. This is a time to be honoring that growth. But this is also a time, as soon as that moon begins to wane, it's time to let go of any of this Gemini energy that just may not be serving us. Another full thing that full moons can do is it's like they can shine light on something that you hadn't realized before. You know, if you're somewhat familiar with your natal chart, or if you've had a reading with me, you can go back and review the video recording to see which area of your life this specifically manifests for you. Okay, not only that, but do you have anything in your natal chart near 23 degrees Gemini? Because just one example here of infinite examples. Let's say, for example, somebody's got Venus at 23 degrees Gemini in their seventh house, their house of relationships. Okay. All of a sudden, this full moon comes and beams her light right on that Venus in your natal chart. And there's something that comes into your full realization about the relationship. I mean, it could be coming through anywhere. It could be coming through your house of communication, your house of karma, your house of communication, your house of career, your house of finances. So there's so many different examples we could come up with here. But full moons can certainly do that, okay? So what I'll do in this recording, I'll break down the sign of Gemini for you in pretty good detail. So you can be thinking about how have I grown in these ways that are related to this sign of Gemini? Is there anything that I've got going on in the sign of Gemini that I want to let go of after this full moon peaks? And I will also be pulling up the chart and showing you all the aspects that are going on with this full moon. Really, really interesting stuff. We've got a T-square going from Sun, Moon over to Neptune in Pisces. Super adaptable yet very creative influences coming through. So we'll go through that. But I'm also going to be talking about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Gemini because these parts of our body become sensitized anytime anything up in the sky is transiting through the sign of Gemini. And for this full moon, we've got the full moon and we've also got Jupiter in the sign of Gemini. So it's a good idea to pay a little extra attention to these parts of our body during this kind of transit. So of course, I'll be mentioning some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body. And I will also be talking about gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Gemini. What I do every single full moon, I pull out my journal, I write down the growth that I've experienced that's related to that zodiac sign. I write down what I want to let go of that's related to that zodiac sign. Of course, I apply it to the area of my chart that it's manifesting through. And then I like to take a few gemstones and put them on top of my journal. You can always find a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. If you don't have any of those gemstones, it's okay. That's nothing to be concerned about. If you want to manifest more gemstones into your life, a new moon is a perfect time to do that. Okay, so let's get into this. This sign of Gemini, this is what we call the mutable air sign. When I say mutable, I'm talking about adaptability. I'm talking about like an energy that's flexible, can kind of shift it. Let's say somebody made some plans and all of a sudden the plans have to, be switched into a different direction. The Gemini energy would be like, all right, let's go that way. Okay. Especially in the element of air. When we think about air, doesn't really want to be stagnant. Nothing really wants to be stagnant, but air especially. Okay, this is like the social butterfly. It's really the sign of communication ruled by Mercury. We'll get into that. But it's like, I'm going over here. I'm going to talk to these people. I'm going to go over here and talk to these people. And the sign of Gemini has a little less tendency to, it's like they can hang out with all different types of people, not have a judgment towards this is the only kind of person I want to hang out with. Sign of Gemini can be very, very flexible with that sort of thing. Now, ruled by Mercury. So Mercury, the messenger of the gods, okay, what Mercury rules over is a huge influence on our nervous system, but really it's like we're constantly receiving information, right? No matter what we're doing, our consciousness is receiving information. That's coming through Mercury. Mercury's like delivering messages, okay? And then when we want to communicate that information, when we want to go relay the message that somebody else relayed to us, Mercury goes in and finds that file of information and carries it back out for us to communicate, okay? That's why Mercury's the messenger of the gods. I don't want to go too deep here because I've already gone into a lot of depth on Mercury in previous videos, but Mercury in Greek mythology is Hermes, messenger of the gods. Mercury in Norse mythology is Odin. Okay, Odin is basically it's an archetype of the messenger of the gods. And in Egyptian mythology, Mercury is Thoth. Okay, absolutely fascinating energy to understand Mercury. Okay, that's why when Mercury goes retrograde, everybody freaks out. Oh, don't have your business meeting while Mercury's in retrograde, that sort of thing. Which there's some truth to that. It just kind of depends on how it's hitting your chart. But that is why this sign of Gemini has so much to do with being that social butterfly. The motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. Okay, it's a super hyper intellectual energy. It is the forever student. Okay, it's the sign that really wants to focus in on the facts. In fact, if we think about the sign of Gemini being over here in the zodiac, opposite that is Sagittarius. Okay, and the sun is in Sagittarius. So happy solar return season to all you Sagittarius out there. But the sign of Sagittarius is much more faith-based, like much more like, oh, I look at the big picture, versus Gemini is like, nope, I'm paying attention to all the little facts. I am the student, okay? And not that also has an influence on the nervous system, okay? But also the sign of Gemini is represented by the twins, okay? This is very much the sign of duality. It's like the sign of siblings, really. And when you think about, of course, not everybody has siblings, but for those of us who do, very often we will find that the first other humans that we're communicating with, other than our parents, because that's a different kind of communication, is with our siblings. Siblings go shut the door while parents in the other room and do the little chatty thing. That's also very much a Geminian kind of influence, okay? But again, going into this sign of duality, sometimes, and literally everything in astrology has pros and cons to it. Every single zodiac sign, every planet, every house, everything in astrology, every aspect has pros and cons to it. Sign of Gemini does kind of get a reputation for being two-faced, or even like this bipolar thing. And by no means am I suggesting that just because somebody's sun is in Gemini or their Gemini rising or Gemini moon, that they are going to be two-faced or have this bipolar situation going on. It's because it's almost like one to go in two different directions at the same time. You notice a lot of people with Mars in Gemini are super active, like, oh, I gotta go over here. Because Mars rules how we put things into action. And this sign of Gemini is the twins. It's the sign of duality. It's super flexible, it's super adaptable, and can also have this ability to kind of be able to see both sides of life, both sides of things, both sides of a situation, and then go and talk about it. Okay, so how have you grown in these ways? First of all, check in on your communication skills. And this is not just verbal communication. This is very much about written communication. Not only that, but the sign of Gemini is very strongly associated with things like social media. Okay, so maybe you have started yourself on a new social media platform, or maybe you've been thinking about authoring a book. Maybe you started on that sort of thing. Even if it's writing a song, this is actually, for somebody who's doing some sort of creative writing, this full moon is a really, really good combination of influences for that. Okay, so how have you grown in these ways? And also maybe check in with yourself on it being the student. Are you open to new ideas? And I feel like I should put some emphasis on this. We are going into a time where over these next 5 years, really over the next 20 years, but especially the next 5 years, I think a lot of people are going to freak out because we are going to get hit with a whole new wave of information. And let's say somebody's stuck, which I've seen this many, many times, where they've been told something their whole life, that it's just embedded in their head. And then all of a sudden they're presented with a new way of perceiving that certain reality. And some people just can't. They're just stuck in, what they've been told. This full moon with all this adaptability and that Gemini energy, being able to shift into, being able to open up your thought process, your I think process to new information, especially through social media. Okay. And I think it's this is a little bit sidetracked, but I think it's a really good idea that we all do our own personal little fact checking, especially going down any rabbit hole. But make sure you're thorough in that fact checking before you really establish some sort of a really hardcore opinion on something. Because really this is what's going on. I mean, not just for this full moon. I'm talking about all these new transits that are coming up. Uranus moving into Gemini, Pluto into Aquarius, Neptune into Aries, a lot of big changes going on. And this full moon really offers an opportunity to be able to, shift into that, for lack of a better term, new age with a little more flexibility. Okay. Not only that, but is there any of this Gemini energy that you maybe want to let go of? Okay, maybe there's been a little too much of the chatty Cathy thing going on. Maybe you've been too sucked into social media. Holy smokes, do we know people that are just, I can't, sometimes I just can't believe. I'm walking around, I'm seeing everybody just on there, walking through the grocery store, like scrolling through, some Telegram thread or whatever it is while they're shopping. I'm like, what are these people doing? So that is something to take into consideration as well. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. Let's pull up the chart. So for those of you who are new here, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is basically a snapshot of what we call the tropical zodiac at the time of this full moon. Again, this is December 15th, 2024 at 1:01 a.m. Pacific time. You might want to see what time this full moon comes through for you in your own time zone. Okay, now these things right here are the symbols for all the planets and the celestial bodies. Like here's the moon, here's Jupiter, here's Mars, over here's Mercury, here's the sun. When we go in the wheel just a little ways, these things are the symbols for the zodiac signs. So all of those things will be beaming through onto Earth, right in the middle of this thing, at the time of this full moon. Okay, so here's the moon. Here's the sun, exactly opposite each other. This full moon is at 23 degrees, 53 minutes Gemini. Okay, and here we have the sun at 23 degrees, 53 minutes Sagittarius. Okay, now, anytime we have a full moon, it means the sun and the moon are exactly opposite each other. That has a huge influence on why full moons kind of make us more susceptible to picking up each other's energy. The two brightest lights in the sky are facing each other, and really it's like they are embracing the growth as well. Okay, when you think the moon just growing, and it's going on, as above, so below, we're all experiencing that. And this is it's like a buzzy kind of energy between Gemini and Sagittarius going on here. All right, now at 23 degrees, this is in the third decan of that Gemini energy, which actually gives it a little twist of Aquarius energy as well, which Aquarius is more, the motto is I know, okay? And not only that, but going into this age of Aquarius, this is what I'm talking about, being open to the new information. The sign of Aquarius floods us with information, especially through the form of technology. Okay, so there's that. Now, trying to decide if I should, I'll just go into this right away. So this right here is Neptune, which Neptune has been going through Pisces since 2012. We've talked a lot about this. Neptune is Pisces ruler, one of Pisces rulers. Neptune is kind of what makes Pisces the mystic of the zodiac. The sign of Pisces is very well recognized for the motto is I believe. It's all about spirituality and empathy and all kinds of it's the sign of oneness. It's the sign, especially of spiritual oneness. And a lot of that comes from Neptune. It's a dreamy energy. It's a foggy energy. Okay. Neptune is Neptune is the god of the sea. It's Poseidon. And we think about just drifting you're drifting out at sea, and it can be kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? But at the same time, it can be a diffusive energy as well. I suppose it depends on the situation. But we've got the sun making a square to Neptune, and we've got the moon making a square to Neptune. And of course, the sun and moon are opposite each other. So it's a T-square. Now, this is interesting because a T-square can definitely create a force. A lot of people who are born with a T-square in their natal chart, there's certain situations in their life that are problematic or challenges come up, but they have to overcome those challenges. And that T-square makes the ability to do that. It creates a force. Okay. And really, since these are all adaptable signs, all mutable signs, this is what I'm talking about, being able to adapt into new belief systems. Again, the motto for Pisces is I believe. And then the motto for Sagittarius is I see. And the motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. Okay, so all of those things and being able to open up to new ideas, that sort of thing, especially creative ideas. This is a very, very, the combination of all of these things can really enhance creativity. Okay, now let's talk about the ruler of this moon. This right here is Mercury. Talked about Mercury is ruler of the sign of Gemini. So Mercury is like the lord of this full moon. And Mercury is in the sign of Sagittarius and in retrograde. So this is really interesting. So again, the sign of Sagittarius, the motto is I see. This is the adaptable fire sign. This is the sign of wildfire. Okay, this is a sign that it's a very faith-based energy, and but with optimism. Okay, Mercury is like going through the nervous system and going, this is like wildfire, delivering messages here, delivering messages there. But while in retrograde, okay, if we think about things in retrograde, if you just think about the energy of that planet, okay, we think about Mercury, the messenger, going to deliver messages, and then puts the car in reverse and is doing it backwards, okay, it can be a really, really good time for reevaluating situations, especially if you've got something near 6 degrees Sagittarius in your natal chart. But we've also got Jupiter here, which follow along as best as you can. Jupiter is Sagittarius's ruler. So just like the last time we had the new moon, this was going on as well. Mercury and Jupiter are kind of opposing themselves in each other's signs, and they're both in retrograde. Okay, so this could be great for studying things that are of advanced knowledge. Again, the motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. It's the student. The sign of Sagittarius is I see. It's more like the professor of things like philosophy, things that are, faith-based, things that are, studying ancient civilizations, or things that are like a natural law, higher law, that sort of thing, common law, that sort of thing could be a really good thing for going through that. And now I'm thinking about a conversation that I just had with a friend the other day, where it's like sometimes you've been studying something and you think you got to figure it out, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, no, now I have to change the way I see this because the person even who was teaching me this realized some new information. A lot of that sort of thing could be going on. And another thing too is that this has we'll get deeper into body parts that the sign of Gemini rolls when we get towards the end of this recording. But I'm just going to put this out there now that these all together here with the moon, full moon in Gemini, and the sun in Sagittarius, and Jupiter in Gemini, and Mercury in Sagittarius, and both of them in retrograde, this is hitting every part of our nervous system. This is like the afferent nerves, basically the information that goes from our skin to our spinal cord, and then from our spinal cord out to the muscle, and then back again, and things are in retrograde. This is just, especially if look at your natal chart, really, if you've got anything at all in the sign of Gemini or Sagittarius, really kind of at any degree, but that you might want to be very, very mindful of your nervous system. And again, I'll go deeper into that and some potential remedies when we get further along in this recording. Okay, so next up, let's talk about Uranus over here. So Uranus, kind of finishing up in this sign of Gemini. I don't like this quincunx going from the sun to Uranus. That's kind of a tough one. It's almost like here's the sun. The sun is like our vital force. And I love the sign of Sagittarius. The sun and Uranus can't connect. It's like a blind spot. That's what this brown line is right here. And that can kind of create like very unpredictable things going on. Look to see in your chart if you've got anything near 24 degrees Taurus, or again, near 23 degrees Sagittarius. There might be, it's like not a good time for things like surgery or something that's very requires seriousness, it might not be the best time for that. Because this kind of a connection between or disconnect between Sun and Uranus kind of can create strange things that would go on. But Uranus next year in July is going to move into the sign of Gemini, but then later on in the year retrograde back into Taurus. And then in 2026, really pick up the momentum going through the sign of Gemini. So with that said, the Uranus energy through that sign of Taurus is coming to an end. The sign of Taurus is very much the sign of money and our earning powers and how we value those things, how we value money and our ability to go earn it. Okay. And then after we earn it, what we do with that. Okay. That's very much the sign of Taurus. It can also have a lot to do with food, but Uranus is what influences revolutionary things. Uranus influences very like spazzy, unpredictable, technological things that are a little bit rebellious. Okay. And is also in retrograde. If we just think about Uranus, if you picture Uranus as like a spazzy guy that's driving his weird, futuristic looking car and kind of just doing weird spazzy things, like kind of sketchy things. I think I'll just all of a sudden turn the wheel a little bit this way, that sort of thing. And then is in retrograde, driving backwards. So it's even stronger. And not only that, but Uranus really does struggle in the sign of Taurus. It's a very debilitated placement because Taurus doesn't like the spazziness. Taurus wants things to be steady. But it's really strong while Uranus finishes up in this sign of Taurus. This is really going to be going on for, again, like another year and a half or so. But it's also, I feel like all this stuff that's going on with the cryptocurrencies, I know that the digital currencies are gaining traction again. Here they go. And I do feel like the combination of Uranus finishing up in the sign of Taurus, because again, Uranus rules over things like technological changes and Taurus rules money. I do feel like that's playing a role here. I also do feel like Pluto finally going through that sign of Aquarius also is playing a role in that, especially while they're trining each other. That's going to be really, really strong next year. Okay, so let's talk about Pluto into Aquarius. So Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. Pluto's finally just no more retrograded back into Capricorn. Hallelujah for that. Some might not agree with hallelujah with that, but I do. I feel like it's just the tick-tocking back and forth. Pluto going through Capricorn and then moving into Aquarius and then retrograding back to Capricorn and then moving into Aquarius and then retrograding. That was a lot of turbulence. But now Pluto is picking up. The sign of Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, at least partially ruled by Uranus. So all those things that I said about Uranus with, the god of the sky, electrical energy, okay, and actually can create disturbances in things like electromagnetic fields. Okay, that is what makes Aquarius what it is. Aquarius is a very revolutionary energy. It's the one that thinks outside the box. It's like the rebel of the zodiac, okay? And that certainly doesn't mean that anybody who is an Aquarius is going to be a rebel. There's just so much more to our natal charts than our sun sign. But the sign of Aquarius is very well recognized for things like inventions, okay? And Pluto is extremes. Pluto is turbulent. Pluto puts us through a very, very powerful transformational process. And again, going through this very electrical energy and having this conversation, basically I'm talking about this blue line, this very, very thin blue line that's going between Pluto and Uranus. That trine at certain points of next year, I think it's right around August, is going to get really, really strong. Those two guys it's like, this is actually Pluto's like Uranus's grandson. And all these guys have battled each other. It's just, it's so fascinating to watch this unfold. But Pluto is very much working with force at 0 degrees Aquarius. Look to see in your natal chart if you've got anything near 0 degrees Aquarius. Wow. If you do, then you have already been going through a very powerful transformational process that is not quite done yet. Okay, so there's that. Let's talk about Venus here. So Venus, I feel like Venus is not super happy right now. There's some beauty that can come from this, but Venus is the influencer of beauty and love and romance and harmony and everybody getting along. Venus is Aphrodite, okay, in Greek mythology, all about, the harmony of life, okay, and relationships, romantic relationships. Venus can also be very strongly associated with a female in your life, not mother, but sister or best friend or a female best friend or a girlfriend, that sort of thing, or a wife or a daughter. But so with this said, if you have anything in your natal chart near 9 degrees Aquarius, something lovely might be going on in your life. Something, a new girlfriend comes in, or all of a sudden you're feeling a little more beautiful. You get some new makeup or something like that. But it just for the collective, when we think about that electrical sign of Aquarius, Venus, I mean, there's definitely qualities to this, but it's just not necessarily her favorite sign to be in because she doesn't get to exude that harmony and romance and that sort of thing. If you think about the sign of Aquarius, it's the fixed, it's the middle of winter. It's the coldest, well, at least for most of us in the world, it's the coldest time of the year. Okay, it's between January and February. And Venus is, she's probably a little cold right now. I'm speaking hypothetically here. But also, here's Mars at 5 degrees Leo in retrograde and opposing Venus. It's not a super strong opposition, but so let's talk about Mars in Leo for a minute here. Mars is action. Mars is what makes us go do what we got to do. Mars is a very dominant and aggressive energy. Mars likes to pierce through things, okay? Sign of Leo is like the exuberant sign of leadership. I mean, this is extreme willpower, but it's kind of aggressive willpower, especially while Mars is in retrograde. Mars is going to be doing some weird stuff, by the way. Mars is going to retrograde all the way back into the sign of Cancer and then move all the way back into the sign of Leo. Pretty severe retrograde here for Mr. Mars. But while opposing each other, I mean, I suppose, again, the good thing about this is Venus might be calming Mars down a little bit. But overall, I do feel like Venus is a little bit under attack. If you've got something near 5 degrees Leo in your natal chart, be very mindful of aggressions within yourself or others around you, unnecessary battles, that sort of thing could be going on. Relationship stuff could be going on or not. This might not have anything to do with relationships in your life. But if you've got something near 5 degrees Leo or 9, again, give or take maybe 6 degrees, 9 say, okay, let's say between 3 degrees Aquarius all the way up to, let's go with 15 degrees Aquarius. Interesting stuff going on for you. Or between 0 degrees Leo and 10 degrees Leo, something along those lines. There potentially could be something that's going on with a relationship that is not exactly the most comfortable transit in the world, but it will pass. And especially with all these retrogrades, especially while Mercury's in retrograde, reevaluate before just going in for, some kind of battle or attack. Mars is actually making a grand trine over to the North Node. So here's Mars, which is very strong trine over to Mercury, which they're both in retrograde. This might be also weird on the nervous system, if I'm being totally honest. But then there's a trine going over. It's a grand fire trine. This can be good for taking action. Again, it really depends on how this is manifesting in your own natal chart. But this can be good for taking action. But I will say this again, if you're going to take action in something, just, really reconsider or reevaluate what it is. Since Mercury and Mars, a bunch of things are in retrograde. Okay, where should we go next? Let's talk about Mr. Saturn here. So Saturn still going through Pisces. So Saturn no longer in retrograde. Hallelujah for that. Saturn is the bringer of discipline, Pisces is the sign of mysticism and spirituality. We talked about that while Neptune's going through Pisces. Pisces just is that flowy sign of oneness. And Saturn is rigid and cold. Okay, I do think, and not only that, but making a pretty darn strong square to Jupiter. This could be a time of really disciplining ourselves with our spiritual practices. It is definitely not a time for escapism. Definitely not a time for escapism. And this time, this square going up to Jupiter that is in retrograde, this could also honestly even be this, because we're talking about faith and religion, but also thinking and intellect. This could also be something that, again, you were taught, you were told, and like some kind of a spiritual belief. Let's say, because I know a lot of people listen to certain things on YouTube and Instagram and all kinds of interesting things that are of a very, very spiritual nature. And there's a lot of beauty in that. There's a lot of fascinating, beautiful truth in a lot of these things. But there's also some things that I say with confidence are not so true. They're kind of, they're just not real. Okay. And this is a time with that square with Jupiter and Saturn, especially since Saturn's in Pisces and Jupiter's in Gemini, where it's like, wait a minute here, I got to question this. I got to question this. Is this just my own belief? Am I stuck in my own belief? Am I not able to see other people's perspective and open up? Maybe it could potentially for some people be a really good time to listen to something new or read a different book, that sort of thing, especially if it's about faith or religion or spirituality or metaphysics or something along those lines. Okay, let's see. Where do we go next? Let's talk about the nodes, and then we'll talk about Chiron. Okay, so the North Node here working so powerfully in that sign of Aries. So the North Node is going through the sign of Aries. It's been going there since July of 2023, but it's just about in January, the nodes are going to change signs. I will definitely make a video about that. The North Node is right at the end when anything gets like to 2 degrees. It really is it's like a very pure form of the influence of that particular zodiac sign. And the North Node is the dragon's head. It pumps energy in. Okay. And that sign of Aries is cardinal fire. It's ruled by Mars. It's an aggressive energy. Again, I'm not saying anybody, just because somebody's in Aries, they're going to be aggressive, but the sign of Aries is in of itself a very aggressive energy. And so that North Node is pumping that fiery aggression in. Look in your natal chart to see if you've got anything near 2 degrees Aries, because there very well could be things that are going on that can actually feel a little overwhelming. It depends on what it is in your natal chart, but can feel like, oh, what is going on? All of a sudden I have to go do this, especially with this grand trine that's going over to Mars and Mercury. Okay. Then we've got the South Node finishing up in Libra over here, which that will also change zodiac signs in January, but is also at that 2 degree mark, 2 degrees, 57 minutes. Moving backwards. If follow along as best as you can. The nodes basically go backwards through the zodiac. They're almost always in retrograde. So them being at 2 degrees, they're almost like the South Node's going to go from Libra to Virgo in January. North Node is going to go from Aries to Pisces in January. But the South Node is the weak point. That's the drain point. That's where things go out. And the sign of Libra, I mean, as I've said so many times before, I'm like, I can't wait for the South Node to get out of the sign of Libra, because I love the sign of Libra. And I love the sign of Aries as well. But the sign of Libra, it's the sign of justice. It's the sign of balance. It's the sign of fairness. It's also a very charming energy. People with their sun or Libra rising, that sort of thing, tend to be very, very charming people. It can hold a great conversation, but it's represented by the scales. It's the sign of justice. And so we've had the weak point transiting through the sign of justice, which is a little unnerving, but it's almost done there. But look to see if you've got anything in your natal chart near 2 degrees Libra. Then there might be something that South Node is trying to take away, trying to let go of in your life. Okay, and then lastly, let's talk about Chiron. Let me make myself a little smaller here. Here's Chiron in the sign of Aries. So Chiron, the wounded healer. Chiron influences wounds that are buried deep within us. Wounds from early childhood. It is said that these wounds come from previous lifetimes. Most people are completely clueless that these wounds even exist. They don't remember them from childhood until something happens in their life where all of a sudden, even if they don't consciously know that what they're thinking about is that particular wound from childhood, there's something that stimulates it. There's something that brings up this wound that happened when you were 3 years old, whether it be something totally traumatic or something super simple. And Chiron, even though Chiron is said to be kind of like the influencer of those wounds, Chiron still wants us to heal from those wounds. That's what Chiron wants. He's the wounded healer. Going through the sign of Aries, he's in retrograde, in another one in retrograde here, so reevaluating healing journey potentially. But going through the sign of Aries, I think for about another year and a half, Aries, again, it's the aggressor. It's the sign of self. It's the warrior. Like this is, especially if you've got anything in your natal chart near 19 degrees Aries. If you do, it's probably been a very big year for you because that's where that solar eclipse was back in April, which was conjunct Chiron. A lot of self-healing going on. A lot of like, I'm going to do this. This is finally the time that I'm going to heal myself. And when we do, then we become healers ourselves. Then we're able, whether it's for like on a professional level, for financial compensation, or just helping a friend heal through something, helping a family member heal through something. Chiron going through Aries, I think, is a really good, that's how I interpret it, just so beautifully, to be able to help and heal our own selves. Okay, I think I covered everything I wanted to there. Let's talk about body parts. Okay, so the sign of Gemini rules the lungs, rules the arms, rules the fingers, rules the hands, does not rule the elbows. The elbows are actually under the sign of Cancer. You'll notice a lot of people, including myself, you'll notice I talk with my hands all the time. I was just giggling the other day looking at my thumbnails, and almost all of them, my hands are in the picture. And it's not one of those things where it kind of, in essence, kind of creates itself. But the only thing I have in Gemini is Jupiter. But I'm a Sagittarius rising. What that means, because Jupiter rules the sign of Sagittarius. So Jupiter is like the captain of my ship. Jupiter is the lord of my chart. So that means Jupiter is going to be very strong in my chart, and my Jupiter's in Gemini. So with that said, I'm quite Geminian, and I totally see it. Not just with the hand talking, but in so many different ways. Since my astrology journey began, I just always was like, oh my gosh, that's totally me. It cracks me up. There could be something going on with hands. Just might want to pay a little extra attention to our hands or our arms or our shoulders. But I think probably lungs are a good thing to focus on here. It's like, well, let's start here. So for the lungs, I really like mullein. Mullein is a gorgeous plant. It's like a weed. It just grows everywhere. In fact, a lot of people are ripping it out of the ground saying it's invasive in all parts of the world, which, okay, I can kind of see that. It does take over. The mullein, generally like out in the wild, you're going to find it like that, about that big, but it can get up to like 12 feet tall, and it grows these giant stalks on the top with these cute little yellow flowers. The leaves can get to be this big, and they're so soft. It's such a soft plant, and it grows all over the place. Okay. The home that I lived in before, just last year, I actually planted mullein. I harvested some seeds. I saw some mullein on the side of the road with the stalk perfectly ready to take the seeds home. And so I planted a bunch, and it just, boom, it just took over. It's all over that property now. And when I moved into my new place, I actually brought more mullein seeds because I wanted to grow some more. But when I moved in here, just a couple months later, I see some mullein popping up from the ground on its own. And I was like, mullein is really, really good for the lungs. Not only that, but mullein is super packed with minerals. It's just a really, really good plant. And something else about mullein as well, I don't know if this is the case for everything, but I will tell you, whatever I grew next to mullein in my garden, say just tomatoes, simple example. If I grew tomatoes over here and tomatoes over here, but this one had mullein growing next to it, that tomato plant got bigger. That happened with everything. That happened with my cannabis. That happened with my tomatillos. That happened with my tulsi, like every squash, everything that I grew near Mullein, the plant got bigger. Okay. But again, I don't know if I never even read about that before. I just noticed it for myself. But Mullein it can be great for what I like about Mullein is that, okay, say somebody's got like a dry, heaving, like hot cough, so it's like really, it's dry and hot. Mullein can be relaxing to that. But also, if somebody's got like congestion, a lot of congestion in the lungs, Mullein can actually help to pull that stuff out. You can do, I have a Mullein tincture. I make a lot of Mullein tea, but you can also smoke Mullein. You can put it in a pipe and smoke it. You can roll it up in a joint and smoke it. You can roll a spliff with it. It's just, Mullein is fantastic. Okay, the other one I wanted to mention is Elecampane. Elecampane it's like almost an emotional memory for me every time I talk about Elecampane, because Elecampane can also be really good for the lungs. Elecampane to me, and this is nothing I've ever read anywhere, but this is from my experience, it reminds me of the smell of cedar, like a cedar tree. It just smells so refreshing and stimulating. But it's also, when my mother was in her final months here, her lungs were really, really rough. Like she had a very, very difficult time because she didn't have the strength to clear her lungs. It was just a lot of congestion. And I did a tea and a tincture for her. And she couldn't really even talk. She kind of lost her ability to talk. But I could see in her face when I give her some of the Elecampane tea and then also put some of the drops of the Elecampane tincture in the tea, so it was kind of a double dose. Within minutes, it was like the look on her face is like lifted up a little bit, and she was able to breathe a little bit better. And so that's my experience with Elecampane. I absolutely love it. When I talk about tinctures, I totally forget that not everybody knows what a tincture is. Tinctures come in a bottle that looks something like this. Okay, it's you can make tinctures all different kinds of ways, but the way I like them is it's an alcohol extract. You can do it with vodka or rum. It has to be a very high alcohol content. I use it's grape spirits. It's organic grape spirits. Oh boy, I forget the name of the company. Oregon Alcohol Organics or something like that. But you put the herbs in the alcohol and you let it sit. It depends on what kind of herb it is. Sometimes it can be ready in 2 weeks. I usually depending on what the plant is, what the plant matter is. Sometimes I'll let it go for a full year. Sometimes I'll let it go for over a year if it's like a root or vanilla. And what it does is it takes the medicine from the plant into the alcohol, and then you take the alcohol as a tincture, like just a little droplet of the tincture. It depends on what it is. Most people would dilute it. That's what I mean by like a dropper. And you just put, depending on what it is, somewhere between 3 and 20 drops, but you dilute it with water. Obviously, you can't go out and harvest Mullein and have a tincture ready by the time this full moon hits, but you can buy tinctures all over the place. But I really like making my own, and they're very easy to make. Okay, so there's that. But again, you can always do a tea form. I don't know that I would smoke Elecampane. I've never even thought of that before, but I know you can smoke Mullein. Not everybody likes to indulge in smoking anything, which is fully understandable. Okay, so enough of that. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the nervous system. As we mentioned, that the Mercury in Sagittarius and Jupiter in Gemini, and this full moon in Gemini, meaning the full moon is in Gemini and the sun's in Sagittarius, and the Mercury and Gemini, or Mercury and Jupiter are both in retrograde. So this is like, woo, in the nervous system. Again, especially if this is hitting something in your chart. Now, there's so many things that you could do for the nervous system. I'm not a doctor. I can't offer any kind of medical advice. But what I like to indulge in, as I've mentioned so many times, is a hops tincture. Hops is, for some reason, it just works really, really well for me. There's so many things. Lemon balm, milky oats or oat tops, which I think you would not want to do that in a tincture form. I think you'd probably be much better off with a tea. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not offering any kind of medical advice, but for myself, I would stick to a tea if I'm going to do milky oats or oat tops. Even oat straw can be good for the nervous system. Meditation can be great for the nervous system, all kinds of wonderful things. I do encourage people to always check in with your healthcare practitioner, but I also very much encourage people to look into this stuff for yourself. There's a fantastic book by Matthew Wood. It's called The Earthwise Repertory. And I mean, there's so many other books out there to learn this stuff. And not only that, just if you are learning stuff online or from books, it's also be mindful about this is coming from somebody else's experience. Oh my goodness. Any book from the evolutionary herbalism is absolutely fantastic. All of these things, because I've had great experiences with them. Okay, enough rambling there. If you'd like to schedule an astrology reading, please do visit erinwageastrology.com. You can schedule straight through my website. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.